Good evening, universe. Tonight I'm going to be talking about the top 12 books that I read in 2022. I know that top 10 is a little bit more common, but there were 12 that I wanted to talk about, so that's what I'm going to do. And I also challenged myself to actually have them in a particular order, so they will be descending from my least favorite of my favorites up to my most favorite of my favorites. I hope that made sense. So the first book on this list, number 12, is going to be Sorcery of Thorns by Margaret Rogerson. This is a young adult fantasy about a girl who's raised in a magical library surrounded by these magical books, and she wants to grow up and be a warden of the books. This is an important job because if the books get damaged, they can become a monster. The books also supply incredibly important information to sorcerers who are important members of society in this world. So she's grown up a little bit sheltered, but the story kicks off when a tragedy strikes her library and she ends up having to work alongside a sorcerer and his demon, who he gets his power from. And the major thing that I loved about this book was that trio, the trio of the sorcerer, the demon, and Elizabeth, our main character. The interactions between Elizabeth and the sorcerer, and Elizabeth and the demon, and the demon and the sorcerer, all of those were wonderful, and I was really interested the entire time. I loved seeing Elizabeth's character arc as she grows to know more about the world and the library and the nature of magic. The story itself was great, but the main thing that I stuck around for was the interactions between the characters and that character growth. Overall, this was a great, fun story, and I really enjoyed it. Number 11 on this list is The Storyteller by Tracy Chee. So this is the third book in the Reader trilogy, also by Tracy Chee, and it's also known as the Sea of Ink and Gold trilogy, but it starts with The Reader. That's the first book. And what that book is about is a young girl named Sephia. This is another young adult fantasy. Her parents have died, so she's being raised by somebody else, and then that person raising her gets kidnapped, basically, by some mysterious people who are looking for a mysterious object. Sephia has the object, and it turns out that that object is a book, but the book has some special capabilities. I'm not going to say too much more because I don't want to spoil anything, and part of what is so wonderful about the reader is being on this journey with her and learning more about the book. So the storyteller takes all those plot threads that started in the reader and concludes them beautifully. We see the conclusion of several character arcs, and there were a lot of really beautiful moments and some really just gut-wrenching moments. Tracy Chee does an amazing job of evoking emotion and creating a really immersive and interesting world. I was really excited to be along with all of the characters that are in this book. Plus, I really enjoy the way that she plays with the actual text and style in the book. I think that's really fun and kept it extra engaging. I'm really excited to read it again because I know that there are things that I missed that were set up, and I'm super excited to get to see them all again. I've actually already read The Reader twice. When I read it this year, it was a reread so that I could finish the story. It has a large cast of characters and a lot of different elements of the story that come together in interesting and sometimes unexpected ways, and I absolutely loved that about this. While I did have a little bit of a complaint that we didn't spend more time in the aftermath of the final confrontation, I still think this was really well done overall, and I highly recommend this series. Number 10 is The Golden Enclaves by Noemi Novik. This is another third book in a series. The series begins with A Deadly Education, and it's called the Scholomance trilogy. This follows a wizard who is finishing out her final years in a wizard school. Despite being high school aged, this is actually an adult fantasy, and I think the main reason for that is just because it gets very dark and gross at some points. Despite that, I really enjoyed it, or perhaps because of that. So our young protagonist, Elle, is I think 17 in the first book, and it follows her as she tries to survive in this extremely deadly wizard school. It's set in our world, but there is a secret society of wizards, and that secret society of wizards made a secret school for wizards called the Scholomance, and the idea is that it is less dangerous than being out in the regular world. The regular world is dangerous because it's full of monsters, and monsters eat wizards. Specifically, they like to go after young wizards because young wizards have all the delicious mana of adult wizards, but are much less able to fight off monsters. So the monsters go after the young wizards, and that makes it very dangerous to be a young wizard. So the adult wizards made something called the Scholomance and send all of their children there to learn because you have a better chance of surviving in there. The idea is that the school is very protected against monsters, but sometimes they still get in, so it's still pretty dangerous. There are no teachers at this school to protect the children. The school itself does all of the teaching. It basically gives the spells to each of the young wizards, and you learn how to do it or you die. So there's plenty of motivation. The book kicks off when our main character, Elle, gets rescued by the hero of the school, Orion Lake. Orion is basically the golden boy of the school. His special ability allows him to pull the magic out of monsters in order to use it and keep killing more monsters. So he is obviously very powerful. He loves fighting the monsters and saving people, and she happens to be one of the people that he's saved. And he has, in fact, saved her many times, and our angry, wrathful protagonist just cannot let that stand. So the book follows their relationship as it develops, while our main character also tries to learn more about magic and how to become a powerful wizard. Also, there is a prophecy going on with our main character that she is going to be a destroyer of wizard communities. Once again, what I liked about book 3 was the finishing of all of the plot threads. I really love endings, and in particular, I love seeing how the plot threads that have been laid in the first couple of books come together and finish out the story. And I think this one did it really well in a really satisfying way. The character arcs were great. I loved all the relationships that Elle developed with a bunch of the different characters. I enjoyed the other characters themselves. And the writing style and pace of this series always keeps me really engaged. So that was fantastic and I enjoyed it. The final confrontation was satisfying, and I loved seeing all of the world building reveals that we got in this book. Book 9 on this list was Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. Since you're watching a video about books, it's likely that you have seen information about Legendborn. This has been a very hyped up book, very well known since its release, and it's deserved. It took me a long time to finally get around to reading it, but once I did, I was really deeply engaged. So this is a young adult contemporary fantasy about a young girl who goes to basically she's in high school, but she starts going to a college program because she was able to test into it. And in this college program, she discovers a secret society that deals with King Arthur lore and also kills demons. That by itself was enough to hook me into the story. Secret societies are cool, and I especially love demon hunting, especially in urban settings. So high school / college girl hunting demons with the secret society, I was all about it. But on top of that, it also had a great pace. It also had some wonderful discussions on grief because our main character has just lost her mother, as well as race because our main character is Black and going to school in the South. Also, what I loved about this, I enjoyed the first, let's say 75% of the book. I loved the last 25% when we get just like reveal after reveal and all these incredible twists. All of that was fantastic. I'm in the middle of reading the sequel right now and I'm really enjoying that too. It was overall just a really fun demon hunting adventure story. Number 8 on this list is Lore Olympus by Rachel Smith. This originally was a webcomic and it's a retelling of the Taking of Persephone myth. That is one of my favorite legends, so I was really excited about this. And so this is a graphic novel. Like I said, it started out as a webcomic and has recently started to become physically published. So I have read the first 3 volumes. I just picked the first volume basically at random because it was my introduction to the series. And so I really enjoyed it and I wanted to pick just one to be, the top book. This basically portrays the Olympians as a really damaged and toxic family. And I really enjoyed that angle on the story. Plus, I love the art. All the characters are really endearing and human and full of flaws and really interesting, so I'm absolutely loving it so far. The things that I like the most about the series are definitely the art, the characters, and of course the original legend on which it's based, because this is one of my favorites from the Greek legends. Number 7 is The Ballad of Never After by Stephanie Garber. I had a hard time placing this one, to be honest, but this is book 2 in the Once Upon a Broken Heart trilogy by Stephanie Garber, and it is about a girl who gets her heart broken when her love becomes engaged to her sister. And he won't talk to her or explain what's going on or anything like that, so she has no choice but to go to the chapel of the Prince of Hearts. In this world, there are basically like small gods who are in charge of particular things. So she goes to the Prince of Hearts, who is one of these small gods, in the hopes of getting some clarity on the situation and ideally getting the chance to talk to her love to figure out what is going on and straighten out this whole messy business. But then the Prince of Hearts shows up and gives her a deal, and she takes that deal and she's like, what could go wrong? And then the rest of the books are what goes wrong. What I liked about this book was, one, the pacing. It's so light and quick and fun that it was just really enjoyable to get through. I was reading it at a time when I was very stressed, so having a light, fun book was perfect at the time. I also like the main character, Evangeline, as well as the Prince of Hearts himself, who is a recurring character in the books. I think this book is really good for if you're just looking for something really fun and enjoyable and light. There were so many things that I loved about it. It was also full of twists and magic. It has this really whimsical feeling to it the entire time that you're reading. But at the same time, it also includes some dark parts like murder and betrayal and complicated romance, and I just really enjoyed it. Book 7 is The Excalibur Curse by Kirsten White. This is another third book in a trilogy. In this particular case, it is the Camelot Rising trilogy, which starts with the Guinevere deception. And this series is about Guinevere going to Camelot and becoming Arthur's bride. But Guinevere has a secret. She's not really Guinevere. She has a secret identity. And so this book follows her as she hides that identity and begins to grow and learn a little bit more about the nature of that secret. I really liked this book because I loved all of the characters. Once again, the characters were fantastic. I loved these iterations of them, particularly Lancelot, and the reveals about Guinevere and the world, and even Lancelot and Arthur and Excalibur. Everything in this book has like this deep, interesting secret lore that was really fascinating, and it had this overarching mystery of who really is Guinevere, and that made it fantastic. I also just happen to love King Arthur stories, so this was really working for me, and this is another series that I'm really excited to go back and reread. Book 5 was The Rise of Kyoshi by F.C. Yeh. This is the first book in the Kyoshi duology, and it follows Avatar Kyoshi as she discovers that she is the Avatar and has to deal with the fallout of that discovery. The main thing that I loved about this series were, once again, the characters. I chose book 1 out of this one just because I thought the plot was a little bit stronger and I liked the setting of it, which is the Earth Kingdom, just a little bit more. I really enjoyed the romance in this book, and I particularly loved the characters of Kyoshi and Yoon. The pacing and all of the lore in the Avatar world was really interesting. I loved seeing the way that things were set up that eventually get us to the point that we see in the animated series, The Last Airbender and The Legend of Korra. I just loved being in this world again with a new story with a character that I was interested in. And I think this carried it off really well. It felt true to the original series in a way that I really enjoyed. Book 4 is Witch Hat Atelier volume number 9. This is a manga series about a young girl who loves magic and wants to be a witch. And in the first volume, pretty early on, some tragedy with magic occurs, and she seeks to undo this tragedy, but the only way for that to happen is for her to learn more about magic and kind of become entrenched in this world of witches. So that is what the series is about. It is beautifully drawn. I can't emphasize this enough. with incredible amounts of whimsy. All of the magic, how the spells work is really interesting, and the lore is fascinating. Every time I learn something new, it feels like this world has been thought out so precisely and interestingly. It's very unique to me. Like, I love witches and stories about witches, and so this version of the witch magic system and spells was really interesting to me. The reason I picked volume number 9 out of all the volumes that I read this year, which was most of them, was essentially that we've had some dark moments set up previously in other volumes, and in this one we're really starting to see the consequences of those dark things. So I am really enjoying that. It feels like the plot is speeding up a little bit, but still really retaining all of its whimsy and magic that I love. We're also getting more depth of character, which I'm really enjoying, especially in Coco. And so for that reason, I picked volume number 9. But really, it's meant to represent the whole series. I absolutely love this series so far. I have volume 10, and I can't wait to read it. Book 3 is The Hero of Ages by Brandon Sanderson. This is yet another culmination to a trilogy. This is book 3 of the Mistborn trilogy, starting with the book Mistborn, also known as The Final Empire. This is about a world in which the Dark Lord has won, and we follow a small band of thieves who want to take him down. This is an adult fantasy series, although I feel that it has a lot of young adult appeal as well. And what I loved about it is just how readable and interesting it was. It is very, even though the books are quite long, it feels quick to get through them because it doesn't feel like a slog or a chore. It feels interesting and engaging the entire time. It really feels like all of it is meant to be there. I loved the characters. In the previous books in this series, I didn't feel like the characters, they felt a little bit one-dimensional to me, but in this one, I really felt them come to life, and I really was endeared by them. I really was even more drawn into their story, more fascinated by them, and really engaged by their depths, especially our main character, Vin. The culmination of everything that has been set up in the other 2 books was wonderful. This is another one of those that I feel will be really satisfying on a reread just because of the way that things are set up to go down in this final book, and it all felt very neat and satisfying and enjoyable. I loved the ending that all of our characters got, and the thing that I liked the most about this book was the world building and the lore. Even though I also loved the endings that our characters got and their arcs over the course of the books, what I loved the most was the lore of the world, and I think it was really well done, really well thought out, and really interesting. This has definitely positively introduced me to Brandon Sanderson, and I'm excited to read more of his stuff. Book 2 on the list is 1,000 Steps Into Night by Tracy Chee. So I think this is the only author who is on my best of list twice, but 1,000 Steps Into Night is a standalone young adult fantasy, and it is about a girl who comes into contact with a demon and is cursed to become a demon. So she has a spot of blue on her body. I think it might be her hand. Maybe not. I'm not sure. She has a spot of blue on her body and it's spreading, and when it spreads over her entirely, she will be a demon. So she sets out on a quest to prevent that from happening. Along the way, she runs into a bunch of spirits and a bunch of different situations that she has to think her way through or out of or figure out in some way. And I just loved this book. As usual, Tracy Chee makes just a very immersive, beautiful world with incredible writing. This book really reminded me of Spirited Away, and that is a movie that I absolutely love. So reading a book that gave me that same sort of feeling of wonder with these spirits and these demons was really exciting and wonderful for me. It also includes the character Geiki, who is a magpie spirit. He's not our main character, but he does follow the main character pretty closely, and he is one of my favorite characters of all time. I absolutely love him, and I think that the book is enjoyable just because he's in it. But it's also really enjoyable just because each adventure that she goes on in the book is really interesting on its own and works well in the overarching story. If you were looking for a new standalone fantasy, I highly recommend this one. Finally, number 1 book of the year and the last book that I read in 2022, Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir. This is about Gideon, our main character, who is living on this spooky, dark planet where they have to look over a tomb, a special tomb that's very important to their religion and socio-political structure. But Gideon hates it there, and she would do anything to leave. After her latest escape attempt is foiled, the royal daughter, the daughter of the royal family, she's known as the Reverend Daughter, comes to Gideon with a chance: you can get off world if you become my cavalier, which would basically be her sacred bodyguard. Harrow, the royal daughter, wants to go to this kind of competition, this challenge that has been set forth, where the royal family and their cavalier can go to a different planet and have a chance to become a lictor, which is an immortal being who works alongside the King Undying, who seems to reign over the galaxy. What I liked about this was the humor and the relationship between Gideon and Harrow. The humor was all throughout the book. It was fantastic. You start it with the very first line. And the relationship between Gideon and Harrow is great because they absolutely loathe each other. You can really see that near the beginning of the book. And so it's really entertaining seeing them forced to work together. This book made me laugh. It made me cry. I mean, it's easy to make me cry, but this book did it anyway, and I really enjoyed it. The world building was also really fantastic. I loved all the characters. It's a big cast, so it did get a little bit confusing for me at times, but I really enjoyed all of the characters. And even though it did have a lot of characters, it was written in a way to make all of the characters very distinct. You could tell them apart pretty easily. And I loved the mystery of the world building because it sets up the reader without really telling them very much. And you just have to trust that things are going to make sense the more that you read. I have heard that that is also the case with the second book, which I have on hold at the library, and I am so excited to start it. But I actually really enjoyed that aspect because I wanted to figure out more about what was going on, because there were a lot of ways in which I did not understand the world building at first. So I wanted to read more so that I would know what the world setup was. And I think it was just really well done, really funny and heartfelt and interesting the entire time. It's hard to say too much more about what it's about just because it's part, for me, of the allure of the book is being a little bit confused at the beginning. It was just fantastic. This is an adult fantasy, by the way. I didn't say that. But it was just so much fun. There were so many moments of horror and delight and discovery. All of it was great. One of the ways that I can tell when I'm really excited about a book is how much of it I explain to and read aloud to my partner. And just like huge chunks of pages, I was coming out and reading to her. And it was great. I think it might be a new favorite series of all time. And I can't wait for the next one. And that was all of my favorite books of 2022. I know this was a little bit of a long one, so I appreciate you hanging out with me and staying all the way to the end. So thank you so much. I hope you had a great year of reading in 2022 and an even better year in 2023. Either way, thank you for watching and have a great night, universe.